Imagine a year where the British government had to appoint a minister for rain, where a bag of simple potatoes cost more than gold, and where millions of families turned on their taps, and nothing came out. This wasn't the Third World. This was Britain, 1976. If you close your eyes, you can still feel the heat that caused it, that heavy, suffocating air that hit you the moment you stepped out the door. The smell of melting tarmac on the M1. The sight of your local park turned into a dust bowl of yellow dead grass. It was the year the rivers stopped flowing and the birds were too hot to sing. For the younger generation, 1976 is just a date in a history book. But for us, it was the ultimate test of endurance. We didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have bottled water in every shop. We just had each other, a bucket for the standpipe, and the grit to carry on. This is the true story of how Britain survived the Summer of Fire. To really understand the panic of that summer, you have to remember that the heat wasn't the only thing burning us. Britain was already on its knees. The sick man of Europe. That's what they called us, and they weren't wrong. Inflation was running at nearly 16%, at one point hitting 24%. Just imagine that. Every week, the pound in your pocket bought less than it did the week before. The Labor government was struggling to keep the lights on and the factories running. So when the heat wave hit in June, it felt like the final straw. It started innocently enough, a few weeks of glorious sunshine. We Brits love the sun. We flocked to the beaches. We bought ice creams. But then it didn't stop. For 15 consecutive days, the temperature stayed above 32 degrees Celsius. There was no cooling breeze, no respite at night. Houses built to keep the heat in turned into ovens. Sleep became impossible. Sheets soaked in sweat. Windows wide open, hoping for a draft that never came. And slowly, the green and pleasant land began to change color. From space, Britain turned from a lush emerald green to a parched, dusty brown. Then the reality hit the kitchen table. I want you to picture a typical mother. Let's call her Mary. She's standing at the counter of the local greengrocer. She's looking at a crate of potatoes. A year ago, these were the cheapest thing on the menu, a staple of the British diet. Mash, chips, roasties. It was what we ran on. But the drought had killed the crops. The potatoes in the crate were tiny, the size of marbles. And the price? It had jumped 400%. Mary looks at her purse. She looks at the potatoes. And she walks away. That summer, fish and chip shops had to put up apology signs. Some even stopped serving chips altogether. This was the hidden struggle of 1976. It wasn't just hot, it was desperate. There were shortages of vegetables. Sugar beet crops failed. For the first time since the war, cupboards were bare, not because of blockades, but because the sky refused to rain and the economy refused to grow. Families had to improvise. We ate strange combinations. We relied on tinned food, but did we riot? Did we loot? No, we tightened our belts. We moaned a bit, yes, but we got on with it. By August, the situation moved from difficult to dangerous. The reservoirs were looking like the surface of Mars. Cracked earth stretched for miles. Ancient bridges and villages that had been flooded to create reservoirs decades ago suddenly re-emerged from the mud. Ghosts of the past rising up to warn us. Then came the order that changed everything, the Drought Act. In places like South Wales and Yorkshire, the unthinkable happened. The water supply to homes was cut off for huge parts of the day. Imagine coming home from a long shift at the factory. You are covered in sweat and grime. You turn the tap to wash your face, and nothing happens. Just a hollow gurgle. The standpipes appeared, metal taps screwed into the pavement at the end of the street. Suddenly, fetching water became a daily ritual. You'd see fathers carrying plastic jerry cans, children with buckets that were too heavy for their little arms, pensioners with kettles. It was humiliating, in a way. A modern country, a victorious nation, reduced to queuing for water like we were back in the Middle Ages. The government appointed Dennis Howell as the Minister for Drought. His job was to tell us to stop using water. We were told to put a brick in the toilet cistern to use less water when flushing. We were told, save water, bath with a friend. The dirty bath rule became law in most houses. No more than 5 inches of water, and you didn't pull the plug when you were done. You used that gray water for the garden. But looking back, there was a strange beauty in it, too. Standing in that queue at the standpipe was the only time you spoke to the people at number 42. You swapped tips. You shared complaints. The Blitz spirit wasn't a myth. It was alive and well in the queue at the standpipe. We bonded over the shared misery. If the heat, the inflation, and the thirst weren't enough, then came the plague. Nature went mad. The heat caused an explosion in the greenfly population. Billions of them. And following the greenfly came the predators. Ladybirds. They weren't the cute little red bugs you see in children's books. They were a swarm. The 1976 ladybird plague is the stuff of nightmares. They covered the beaches. They covered the pavements. If you wore a yellow or green shirt, you were attacked. People remember walking down the street and hearing the crunch, crunch, crunch under their shoes. They bit your skin. They got into your food. It felt biblical, like a punishment for enjoying the sun too much. And then the land started to burn. The New Forest, the Dorset Heaths, the North York Moors. The British countryside is not designed to burn, but that year it went up like tinder. The ground was so dry that fires didn't just burn the grass. They burned underground, eating through the peat, only to pop up 100 yards away behind the firefighters. Our fire brigades were overwhelmed, exhausted men, dehydrated, fighting flames with barely enough water to drink, let alone spray. Soldiers were called in to beat the fires out with rubber flaps and shovels. The smell of wood smoke hung over the suburbs for weeks. It was a summer where you never felt truly safe. But here is the contrast. If you ask anyone who was a child in 1976, they will tell you it was the best summer of their lives. For the kids, the economic crisis didn't exist. The mortgage rates didn't matter. School was out. The sun was shining. And the days lasted forever. We lived outside. We rode our chopper bikes in gangs, patrolling the melting streets, the tarmac sticking to our tires. We played cricket in the park until 9 p.m. because it was still light and warm. We drank water from the garden hose before the band came in, and it tasted of warm rubber, but it was the best water you ever tasted. We didn't have iPads. We didn't have video games. We had a stick, a ball, and the sunshine. We jumped into canals and rivers that were dangerously low, splashing in the mud. We queued at the ice cream van for a fab, a zoom, or a screwball. The ice cream would melt down your hand before you could even finish it, sticky and sweet. While our parents worried about the water meter, we were making memories that would last a lifetime. It was a golden age of freedom that we never saw again. August dragged on. The government started talking about rationing water even more severely. Standpipes for everyone, industries closing down. The mood was getting dark. We were tired. We were thirsty. And then the irony of ironies. Just days after Dennis Howell was appointed Minister for Drought, he did a rain dance. On the August bank holiday, the sky turned purple. The air pressure dropped. The birds went silent. And then the thunder cracked. It was the sweetest sound any of us had ever heard. The rain didn't just fall, it hammered down. It hissed as it hit the hot pavements. Steam rose up from the streets. People didn't run for cover. They ran outside. Grown men stood in their gardens, letting the water soak their shirts, laughing. Children danced in the gutters. The drought broke. The siege was over. But the drama didn't end with the first drop of rain. In fact, nature had one last cruel joke to play on us. Because the ground had been baking for months, it was hard as concrete. So when the heavy rains finally hit, the earth couldn't drink it. The water just ran off the surface. Within days, we went from a dust bowl to a swimming pool. September and October of 1976 became two of the wettest months on record. Flash floods tore through towns that had been begging for water just a week earlier. Basements flooded. Roads turned into rivers. It was chaos. And here is the funniest fact of 1976. Poor Dennis Howell, the man appointed Minister for Drought in August. Just weeks later, the Prime Minister had to urgently give him a new job title. He officially became the Minister for Floods. You couldn't make it up. One minute he was telling us to save water, the next he was trying to get rid of it. It was the ultimate British irony. But even after the reservoirs filled up, the habits we learned didn't disappear overnight. The fear of running out had gone deep. For months, even years, after the drought ended, people still felt guilty flushing the toilet. Old ladies kept those bricks in their cisterns for decades. We had been conditioned to believe water was precious, and that fear stayed with us long after the puddles dried up. Looking back now, nearly 50 years later, we live in a different world. We panic if the Wi-Fi is slow. We complain if the supermarket runs out of our favorite brand of coffee. We have forgotten what real shortage feels like. So, the next time you turn on a tap and cool, clear water flows out, take a second to appreciate it and spare a thought for the generation that stood in line, bucket in hand, under the blazing sun of 1976. Did you survive the long, hot summer? I want to hear your story. Did you have a standpipe on your street? Do you remember the ladybirds biting? Tell me in the comments below. Let's keep these memories alive. Thanks for watching.